Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed by Women in AI, Safinah. Excited to learn more about your work and your sort of path to MIT. Would you mind starting off by telling us a bit about your background and what led you to the Media Lab?
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me first. I think it's a really cool talk series that y'all are doing. So I think I had a sort of atypical path. Like I'm not actually from a machine learning background. So I was a designer before I did design school. Then I worked in the industry. I was doing designing games. Then I was also doing some like front end UI design kind of work. But I was really interested in education, like even the games work that I was doing that was around educational games. And I was at CMU before MIT, and I was working with the robotics group there doing some human robot interaction work. And I kind of wanted to like marry the two. And I found this lab at the Media Lab that does a lot of like human robot interaction for education or child robot interaction for education. And that got me really excited because working with embodied robots gives you another dimensionality of interaction to work with. Like there's bodily animations, there's children think of them as their peers. And I thought it was like a compelling way of like promoting learning. So I joined the lab and then I've been working on a bunch of like applications around child robot interaction for learning.
Yeah, and I guess like where did that interest in education come from? Or did it start off, you said in game design, or did it sort of start off in robotics and then sort of blossomed from there?
So I think it started off before that. Like even during undergrad, I had done like a bunch of side projects around using tech to make a lot of concepts more accessible, like learning concepts more accessible. And I actually think digital media are very powerful because there's a lot of gap in access to education everywhere. Like especially where I'm from, there's a huge like gap that people have, and I think digital media also has its own accessibility problems, but I think it can bridge a lot of those gaps. And especially with a lot of like emerging media, like robots, for instance, we've seen that kids get more excited about learning. We've seen that they are more engaged. We see that they copy robot behaviors. We've seen that these robots have become more and more accessible, easy to deploy in schools, can keep going, act as great like teaching aids. So I think I've always been interested in education. Like I think that's my bigger like area that I always wanted to be in. And I just found like an interesting medium to apply it in. That was fun also.
That's awesome. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. And you mentioned that you don't come from a machine learning background. What has sort of been maybe like the most difficult part of transitioning to the Media Lab and your work there?
I think it was technically challenging in the beginning because I felt like I had a different background than a lot of my peers. But then I think that also then became the best part of it because you get to be like interdisciplinary and you get to bring in like a unique perspective. And over time, I think media lab's like one of those places where you learn to be technical over time and you like learn it on the job. So I don't feel like as different in background anymore. But I think at the beginning it was challenging to like not be a computer science major, for instance.
And you said you mainly learned by doing. Were there any other sort of resources that you used to sort of learn about this space more?
I did a bunch of classes. I think classes at both like MITxHarvard are pretty great. You can take those as scaffolding to like build up your learning. I worked on collaborative projects and I highly recommend doing that because then you're working with someone who has a completely different skill set than you, but the same goal as you. So I think that really helped a lot also.
Awesome. Pivoting over, I think, to some of your work and research, there have been multiple research projects about how robots can influence a child's behavior in terms of creativity, a growth mindset, curiosity. Can you talk a little bit about the design and outcomes of this work?
Yeah. So at some point, beyond cognitive learning, which is a lot of what my group was doing with robots, I got really interested in behavioral learning. And one of the things that we were observing with our very first project that we did with behavioral learning, which is around growth mindset and creativity, was when robots exhibit these behaviors, so these artificial behaviors, we saw that children were copying them. And that actually makes a lot of sense from a psychology point of view, because children pick up these behaviors from their mentors, their peers, others in their environment, basically. And these kids growing up with technology also view as these embodied technology as others in their environment. So I was really interested in creativity because I think that's like a huge part of learning. It helps you with personal well-being, growth, learning. It's helped me a lot. And I think that it's been like a huge driving factor in a lot of my work. So I was very curious that who does creativity transfer also? And I think with generative models being a thing now, machines can express creativity. So I had all of these robot applications where kids collaborated with robots and they created something together. And the something was a lot of different things. So it was like stories or jokes or drawings or like physical Lego structures. And the robot exhibited different behaviors that have shown to be promoting creativity from a human point of view. Like these are a lot of things that humans do to help each other be creative. So for instance, I would ask you like a reflective question, or I'd ask you, oh, do you think there's another way to do that? Or I would myself come up with some ideas, and then you would be motivated to come up with some of your ideas. So we did all of these things, and we saw that they all really help children with their creativity. And I think one of the points that I was trying to make there was that we're embedding all this technology and pedagogical tools and children's learning tools, but I think we also need to think about their creative growth. And all of these tech also do have the ability to express artificial creativity. So I don't see it as a way of like replacing human teachers or like humans not helping other humans be creative. None of that, but I see it as a great like support to creative growth.
Yeah, and the robots themselves are not sort of in the human's likeness. Is that like an intentional design choice, and how do you think that contributes?
Yeah, so I think this has always been the philosophy of our group of like we make very sure that our robots don't look like humans. They are like soft toy, like friendly looking toy robots, but the technology behind them is like so pretty sophisticated, and they are personalizing to every child, and they're trying to like role shift and do all of that, but we make sure that children know that these are not humans. And from like an ethical point of view, they're always debriefed about how they work, what data sets they're using, what sort of thing is being recorded, how the data is being recorded, being used, and like what the limitations of those robots are. So yeah, we make sure that they don't look like humans and like make this demarcation that this is not actually a human teacher, but it's an artificial peer that you're collaborating with.
Yeah, they're very cute. And can you talk a little bit about how AI is used in this context, or maybe in the context of some of the work around like AI-enabled non-player characters during gameplay?
Yeah. So one of the things that help children with learning is games. And there's a lot of literature around games for learning, play for learning, play-based learning. And that is one of the things that we wanted to use in our research also. So we have had some applications where we situated the robot as an NPC, and NPC means a non-playing character. Yeah, this word has been taken from video games actually, where you have all this like side characters that kind of help you get to your quest and are there. They have commentary, they're like talking to you, but they're not really actively the player, you're the player, but they're helping you with these common goals. So we actually made a few games where the robot acts as an NPC, and the child is collaborating with this robot. And we found mixed results. Like one, the task that we chose was a little bit too complex for the kids that we were working with. But we noticed that it did help children, especially with creative problem solving. But we didn't see as much creative growth as some of our older applications that were more open-ended. So we're still sort of working on that and seeing how can we leverage robots as better NPCs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I guess just one follow-up on the fuzzy robots would be like, what is there any sort of plan or thinking around like how you sort of expand the use of these in schools, or is there any sort of more longer term thinking on some of these applications?
Yeah, so actually a lot of the efforts in our group right now, like engineering efforts, are also towards making these studies more durable and more long-term. So earlier, like the longest term studies we used to do was a few months, and we used to like go to the schools, and there used to be a researcher would set up the robot. But over time, our robots have become pretty robust. And now we have like a kit that we can send to schools, even with none of us actually being there. We're collecting data remotely, and these are deployed in schools in different states. And we want it to be a robust enough system that it works without like a teacher or a person being there, and make it as economic as possible, and like be a setup in a school that doesn't require regular maintenance. So I think there are, yeah, definitely like there are a lot of efforts and plans towards like how do we make this more feasible for long-term studies. And I think long-term studies are really important because you learn a lot in like one-shot studies where you go to school, do one study, see the change that happened before and after, but that doesn't say a lot about long-term change. So in some of our studies, we've done like an 8-month study, for instance, and we saw what the change was from before those 8 months to after, which is a long period. But it would be great if we could do like year-long or multi-year long-term observation of how children's like behaviors are changing or their cognitive growth is happening.
Yeah, I'm sure that the insights are totally different, or you can see how closely the child's reaction is tied to like that one instance or like growth over time. So makes sense. I think you mentioned that you sort of briefed the participants on what data is collected and that this is sort of not a real teacher, just a robot. I think another piece of your work is focused on developing AI literacy for children. And there's sort of like the daily AI curriculum. Can you talk a bit about that work and sort of maybe what challenges you've encountered and the overall goals?
Yeah. So in all of our work with AI and children and robots and children, what we noticed was that a lot of the children actually don't know how these tools work or how AI works, what data is being recorded, what some of the ethical concerns around this are. And we know there are a lot of ethical concerns around AI and machine learning. And these concerns also live in the tools that children use. So like middle school children today use social media, they use Instagram, they use TikTok, and all of these use different kinds of machine learning algorithm. And they have issues like they have algorithmic bias, there are data security issues. Children don't know how their data are being used. So I think this was all of the beginning of our motivation towards doing K-12 AI literacy. And we've engaged with a lot of students, a lot of teachers, and tried to make those concepts of machine learning more accessible to these young students. And there are two main barriers. One is that they don't come with the same amount of prerequisite knowledge that like someone our age does, because we've had these prerequisite courses, we know the math, we know the computer science. And the other thing is they don't have the same amount of resources. Like you won't expect a child in middle school or their teacher to like have a GPU to train a model, right? So I think our base challenge was how do we make these concepts accessible, have them understand these things, even without having these prerequisites or without having these computational resources. And we learned a lot from computer science education. So there's a lot of work done in K-12 CS Ed. So we learned a lot from that, modified it a lot to K-12 AI education. And then even within that, I took a very like creativity angle in that we developed a curriculum around creative AI literacy, where we spoke about generative models, how they are made, how they are used to create media, to create art. And then the ethical side of it, that is, how can it be used to create deep fakes that are manipulated, like faces or videos of people or audio of people, and what are the ethical implications around that. And then we also discuss some like policy around AI and what should be like company policy, what should be government policy. And like middle school students are so young, but they still have like really insightful thoughts around like what these different companies and governments should do. And it's great that they come out of these workshops with a very nuanced understanding of like how AI works, how it affects their life, and like which of their data is being recorded, what bias is, things like that. So yeah, the daily curriculum is one of those efforts. It stands for Developing AI Literacy. And it's a generic AI curriculum. So the first week focuses a lot on like supervised learning, logic systems, unsupervised learning, data science. And then the second week focuses a lot on creative learning and creative AI, ethical implications of creative AI, and careers around AI.
Mhm. That's awesome. It's great that they sort of have the opportunity to see that at a young age. I'm just in my first AI class at MIT now, so they're getting a good head start. So that's awesome.
Do you like it?
I do. I love it. It's called AI for Impact. It sort of
Nice.
talks about like business cases for AI in different fields. So it's been really interesting so far.
Very cool.
I think shifting away from research, I would love to ask you what advice you might have for young people or people who are interested in some of these fields like AI, robotics, education. What advice do you wish you had received at a younger age? And especially for folks coming from maybe non-traditional backgrounds or maybe sort of not computer science backgrounds.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest like advice, I don't know how qualified I am to like give out advice, but I think one of my biggest advice is like regardless of the background you come from, it's very, very valuable, like whatever you bring to the table. Like the more I've been in research, the more I've realized like, let's say someone's an artist or someone's coming from humanities or social sciences, like the kind of expertise and real world knowledge that they bring in is very, very valuable. So I think like never think that if I'm not like from a traditional background, my knowledge is not valuable. No, it totally is because at the end of the day, what we're building, most of what we're building is still human technology. Like even the AI systems that we build are for humans. So I think just understanding art, for instance, like is so, so important to the kind of work that we do. And I think like there's a lot of exciting things happening right now. Like I still see it as a youngish field, and there's a lot going on. Things change every day, so I think it's a really exciting field to be in. And I would also say that like read about ethics early on because I think that's really helped me to like think responsibly about creating the things that we create.
Yeah, and I think on that topic, any sort of resources you would recommend for folks hoping to learn more about this space in general?
Yeah, I think begin with ethnographies. So there are, if there are like certain populations that you would want to work with, read ethnographies around them. So when I first joined the lab, I was really interested in working with like students with disabilities. So I found a bunch of ethnographies around autism spectrum disorder. So those were really valuable to me for from like a research point of view. I would keep up with conference proceedings a lot. So like if say fairness is a thing you're interested in, there's FACT, which is a conference around like fairness and AI. So I would read their proceedings. I think one of the things that I was most interested in was human AI interaction and human computer interaction. So Kai proceedings were super interesting to me. There are cool workshops, which I think people usually miss out on. Like people think of reading as like conference papers or books, but workshops often have like new ideas. So I was recently reading all of the works from last year's Resistance in AI workshop, which is like a cool NeurIPS workshop. And there were so many really, really nice ideas. So I think all of these like bizarre, that people make zines a lot, which are like illustrated small stories.
Very
And
cool.
there are now a bunch of like zines around machine learning and machine learning in art, AI and ethics. So I think those make for really interesting reading too. I don't know, was that the answer you were expecting, or did you?
Yes. The zines is surprising, but definitely I would assume one of the more fun ways to learn about this area. So that's awesome. Great. Well, I think that concludes my questions. So thank you so much for your time, Safinah. It was great interviewing you.
Yeah, it was so nice meeting you. Thank you so much. This was so fun.